I'm starting off by pinning the model on a cork for ease of painting. To do this, I'm scoring a mark with a scalpel and drilling a hole with a pen drill. I'm then using some paperclips as pins and securing them with some superglue. Once dry, I can put it into a cork. I primed the model with grey surface primer and I'm base coating with sick green. I'm doing some light shadows with black green. I'm then doing some small highlights on the raised areas with Moot green. I'm going over it with a wash of Biel-Tan green to darken all of the recesses. Once that's dry, I'm dry brushing with Moot green. And then lightly dry brushing in certain areas with Daemonic yellow. For the chest, I'm undercoating it with bold titanium white. I'm also using this on the fins and end of the tail. Once that's done, I'm going over the top with Daemonic yellow. Once that's done, I'm going over it with a wash of light rust. I'm going over it with dry brushing a mix of Daemonic yellow and white. For the lines on the fins, I'm using sick green. A good way of making edges easier is to use the side of your brush to prevent the bristles from bending, which risks them splitting in the wrong direction. I'm then using Moot green in the centre to highlight them. For the horns and teeth, I'm using silver grey. For the tongue, I'm using Khorne Red. I'm then using Agrax Earthshade over the top. Going back over with silver grey on the teeth for highlights. For highlights on the tongue, I'm using Mephiston Red. For the eyes, I'm base coating them with bold titanium white. A good way of doing fine detail is by holding the brush at an angle with as little pressure as possible, using small dabbing motions. The less pressure you use, the less the bristles will bend, meaning you will be able to achieve a finer point. I'm then going over it with Trollslayer orange, and then whilst it's still wet, dabbing a little bit of Averland sunset in the middle to create a gradient effect. Once done, I'm making a tiny line in the centre of the eye with some Abaddon black. I want to airbrush the turrets, so I'm covering up the rest of the model with masking tape. I'm starting off by undercoating them in bold titanium white, and going over the bottoms of the turrets with Trollslayer orange. For the tops of the turrets, I'm using Daemonic yellow, trying to create a gradient. A bit of back and forth was needed to make it as smooth as possible. Once I was happy, I went over the top with a wash of light rust. For highlights, I dry brushed with Daemonic yellow. Next, I undercoated, then went back over the flags with bold titanium white to undercoat them. The lighter the undercoat, the brighter the colour on top will be. Afterwards, I went over them with a mix of Ahriman blue and Gauss blaster green. And then dry brushed over the top with Gauss blaster green. Next, I'm going over with a wash of Drakenhof Nightshade and cleaning up any areas of the turrets that I got any blue on. Once that's done, I can then take the masking tape off. I'm then just adding some light rust onto the bottoms of the fins and end of the tail. You can use water to thin them down to make the gradient smoother. I'm using Caledor Sky for the pillars. Next, I'm using Drakenhof Nightshade over the top. For the towers, I used Xeris Purple. For the roof, doors and detail, I'm undercoating in white. For the detail and roof, I'm going over them with Trollslayer orange. Lightly dry brushing with Daemonic yellow. For the doors, I'm using a mix of Ahriman blue and Gauss blaster green. Cleaning up with Xeris Purple. For the floor, I'm using Caledor Sky. For the supports, I'm using Mephiston Red. I'm base coating the skulls with silver grey. I'm highlighting the floor with Ahriman blue making sure to use the side of my brush at an angle to make it neater. For the highlights on the supports, I'm using Evil Sun Scarlet. I'm highlighting the detail with Daemonic Yellow. For the chains, I'm using Dwarven Gold. I'm then using Rakeland Flesh Shade on top. I'm doing a tiny highlight on the eye with some white. Securing all the paint in, I'm using a gloss varnish, and then a matte varnish. To accentuate some areas, I'm going back over the eye, mouth and chains with a gloss varnish. Taking the model out of the cork, I'm removing the pins with some pliers. I filled in the holes that have been left behind with some sprue goo, and then went over it with Sick Green, along with a gloss and matte varnish. And that is the model complete.